this is literally last minute advice. Hopefully something makes a light bulb go on and you score more marks as a result. So this is really last minute advice that could make a big difference. I mean, some of these things that I'll mention tonight can make a 10 or 20% or percentage points difference in a question or in a test. So it's really important stuff. But it's too late to do theory now, and it's also very late to do detailed questions. So the main thing is it's how to score more marks with stuff that you already know. So that is the main purpose of the stuff that I want to chat to you about tonight. So the first thing is, for this last week, don't worry too much about the theory. Yes, if there's something that you still don't understand, by all means, go through the videos of that or to ask a question. It's better to ask your questions early this week. I'll get to that at the end. And just a quick note again, I'm recording this. So if for some reason you drop off, I'm just going to keep going and I'm going to post this recording in the classroom. So if you want to ask anything, just don't be afraid. Switch on your microphone because it's only you at the moment. And I might not see it in the chat. So the main thing is, yes, theory is important, but it's so much theory. And if you fell behind, there's no sense in catching up this week. So if you go through theory, it's really just to quickly revise something and hopefully something on the basics. Because every question that you'll get will have at least 50 or 60% easy marks in it. It might be distributed in the question or hidden in the question, but there's enough easy marks to pass a question. So your second and third year work is enough to get you through if you identify and score the easy marks. A lot of students think wrongly that they fail CTA because they don't know the difficult stuff. And that's really the case. It's usually the fundamental, the basic stuff that's lacking, or they misread the question, they answer the wrong question, they don't answer the question, or they go down a rabbit hole waffling on about some discussion without focusing on what they asked in the question. So theory is not the solution for this last few days. And you have to score the easy marks first. And the first thing that you need to do in a test, I've seen some people who send their attempts to me do this in the required, when they say it's X amount of marks for a question, say 20 marks for a specific section of a question, multiplied by 1.5 and write it down. So 30 minutes. And that's how long you take for that specific question. So I always did that. Every single exam I ever wrote, I did that. So I would first very quickly go down the mark allocation, multiply it by, it's actually, so 100 marks, 3 hours, but just it depends on what the question is. I can't remember what your questions are because all the different years are different. But if it's 180 marks for 100 marks, then it's 1.8 minutes per mark. Or if you have reading time, extra 30 minutes, then you can add that. But multiply the minutes per mark by the number of marks, write down the time. And then what I did every single time, I wrote down the actual time on my watch when I started a specific section of a question, and I added that time that I have for that question. And when I reached that time on my watch, I stopped. I stopped and I stopped halfway through answering the question and I moved on to the next one. And this really is to score the easy marks in every single question. Otherwise, it gets very difficult to decide how much extra time will you spend on a specific question, because you might think, I know this, I have more to say on this, so I'll take some time of the next question to score some more marks here, and then I'll just sacrifice or work fast in the next one. That's a very risky strategy, because if you've already gone over the time, chances are you're already saying stuff that's maybe not hitting the marks. So always stick to the time, and that will force you to get the easy stuff down first. And even if you run out of time for a specific question, I'll show an example just now of where someone got 0 for a question where they should have gotten at least some marks. But if you get to the end of a question and you're not done yet, just make an assumption, guess the final value or guess the conclusion, so that you answer the actual question. So if they ask you to calculate the weighted average cost of capital, and you only get halfway or 2/3 through the calculation, guess a weighted average cost of capital, write it down as a final answer. So then at least you've answered the question. Because if you stop halfway, you haven't answered the question, and they should really give you 0. They don't have to mark your calculations. Same if they ask you to um, give an opinion on something, write down your final answer. Don't leave it open after you've started your discussion. Otherwise, you haven't answered the question, and they don't really need to answer or mark any of your supporting arguments to get to that conclusion. So if they say, should this be recognized as an asset or not, if you've gotten halfway through and you're run out of time, just say yes or no based on what your supporting discussion is, and then you've answered the question. So always make sure that you finish the question, even though you run out of time. Just put the final answer in there, even if it's wrong, because they're not going to recalculate all your calculations, and then move on. So make sure that you answer the question. I just want to see if there's anyone else. No, not yet. In the exam itself, super important. Almost all or 80% of the questions I got throughout this year, where someone said, where did they get this? Why did they do this? Where's this in the, where did this number come from in a question? It's almost always something that they misread in a question. The student missed a line, or they read the line, but they just missed a piece of information in there. So all the information that you need is in the question or in the required. So if you find like, oh, I don't know where to start, I don't know, just read very carefully, and you'll see all the questions, even though it's integrated, still has demarcated areas of the question that cover certain areas of the required. So it's not like if they ask you to calculate the WACC and the next question is the taxable income or some auditing procedure, it's not like the whole 6 pages of the case study could apply to that weighted average cost of capital calculation. It will be somewhere under a heading. There'll be some information. So go and look through that section and read the notes very carefully. First thing that or the first time this year, it is the first time this year that they put the required in the actual question paper that they've handed out. In the past, you usually got some reading time, like in the ITC, which changes now to the IAC, the Psycho Board exam. But now they give you the required as well, and that's going to be the same in the Psycho exams in future. And this changes the way that I would do it. It's still tricky because if they give you a 6-page case study or 8-page case study, or maybe even 10 or 12 pages, and then a required at the end for 50 or 100 marks, it's difficult to decide, should you first read the case study, should you first read the required, should you read the whole required, all the questions, or just the first one and then start. So this is the stuff that I would focus on this next week, is to find a strategy that works for you. So what I would generally do, but it depends on the question, but I would generally read the introduction to a question in the case study, like the first few paragraphs or the first half a page, just to see what industry is this company in, what does the company do, who owns the company, just like some background of the company, just to get an idea. And then immediately I imagine myself working for this company. So you have to make it real. I'm in this company, and everything else, all the other information that they're going to give me will impact my job. And your job is the stuff in the questions, the stuff that they ask you. So whether it be auditing or tax or accounting or management accounting. So always just read the background quickly. Don't spend more than 5 or 10 minutes on it, and then jump to the required. So now you can quickly scan through the required. You'll quickly pick up, oh, there's some audit procedures, there's NPV question, or there's some IFRS thing. I can see accounting or tax. So you'll have an idea of what is being asked, and then go and scan through your case study again. So this is the 6 or 7 pages. So just quickly look at, oh, there's a main heading, and you'll see maybe this is a statement of financial position. There's some notes, and they give you some cost of capital and debt and share prices and stuff. So you know, oh, this is the WACC stuff. So just write WACC next to it. You'll see it on the screen there, no highlighting. Don't highlight a bunch of stuff in the required. You'll spend an hour highlighting everything that sounds important. And if you read these things, everything sounds important. So you'll highlight almost everything. And then when you get to the required and you start answering your question, nothing stands out because it's just a bunch of highlighting. So I would read paragraph, the main heading, the first heading, see quickly what type of information, maybe it's weighted average cost of capital information, or you can see, there's code of professional conduct, or there's a CA that's in some independence issue or whatever. So you can see, this is auditing or CPC or whatever. So just make some notes on what you can find in each of these paragraphs or sections under the main headings and the pages, and then start answering question one. That's what I would do. Now, there's no perfect way to do it, because the other alternative is to read the whole thing for half an hour like you used to do in the past when you only got the case study without the required. But now, because you have the required, you can focus more on what you want to get out of the case study. So this is the stuff that I would practice this week, is to just find an approach that works for you. The reason why we'd rather make notes instead of highlighting is then if you come back, so say you do this quickly for 15 minutes throughout the thing, you just say, this looks like WAC stuff, this looks like a new financing option, or this looks like a new investment, this looks like some costing stuff, or there's some stuff that went wrong, like risks. If you just write the word next to it, now you get to the required again, you read the detail, then you can quickly go back and say, I see on page 3, I said WAC information. So then I can just read that section under the main heading and answer that question properly. If you just highlighted everything, it's going to be difficult to find what you're looking for, and you have to reread the whole case study again. So the key thing here is just don't highlight everything without thinking, and find a way that works for you. But this is stuff that you need to practice now, so that next week when you're going to the exams, you have some idea of where to start. You don't then have to decide, should I read the whole case study? Should I read all the requirements in detail? Or should I make notes, whatever? And then remember, all the information is there. So if you're unsure, just read again, because sometimes you read something, and the next time you read it, you read something else. And the third time you read it, it's like, there are two things here. So remember, Claudia used to say, if you read a required, put your finger on every word and only move on to the next word once you've thought about the significance of a word. And then if there's an or an and, circle it, because if there's an or an and, it means there's a second part of the question. So there's more stuff that you get marks for. So if they say, discuss this, and this, or make sure that you discuss both parts of that question. Otherwise, you're not going to get the easy marks for each part of it. So now, something this is almost like magic, this next thing that I'm going to discuss, this TAC approach. So TAC stands for theory. That's all the knowledge we have. Application, a word that we throw around all the time, and in psychos comments always, and lecturers talk about application. That's a problem. So theory, application, and conclusion. So those three things. Now this would have changed my life if I had to write the exams now, because I remember I struggled with discussion questions, and back then it wasn't as big a component as it is for you now. But let's look at this. So theory is the IFRS rules, the IFRS standards, the principles in IFRS, or the sections of the Tax Act, the rules in the Tax Act. That's the theory, or the auditing standards. So theory is what should the answer be. So for an asset, it should be a resource under the control of the company due to some past events. So that's the theory, the should be. Next is the is. So what is the situation? So in the case study, they gave you a fictitious company and you are pretending to work there, and there is certain things that's applicable to this company. So they might have a resource that they purchased some time ago, but they don't control it. So that is the situation. That's the application. So when they ask you to, say, discuss the recognition or whatever disclosure of this transaction, you automatically think, I need to apply some theory. And often students just write the theory. And in some solutions, you'll see the theory, but they'll say no marks for theory alone. So theory alone won't give you any marks. You have to apply it to the situation, the case study. So for every piece of theory in a discussion question that you write down, whether it's tax or auditing or financial accounting, you have to apply it to the case study. So we know application, but this is how we do it. So you'll write so say they say, discuss whether this company is a small business corporation in terms of the Tax Act. So there's a theory in the section, I can't remember, 56, whatever. There's a theory, so all the criteria. So you write the first criteria down, but then you immediately apply it to the case study. Say this specific company, mention the name, earns a gross income of less than 20 million. So that's the theory and the ease, the application. And then you do this for every piece of theory. You apply it to the information and match the should be with the is. And then at the end, you conclude. You say, so what? Oh, wow. What's that background behind me? Don't know what that was. So, so TAC, theory, application, conclusion. So for every discussion question, you have to match theory with application. You can't just write a bunch of stuff without mentioning the theory, and you can't just write theory without applying it. And then you conclude. And then with the conclusion, I always try to pretend I'm a lawyer and I answer the question. So say they say, should this or discuss the accounting or the tax treatment, or should this be impaired or whatever, you have to say yes or no, because they asked you to whether it should or should not. So you have to give a conclusion. But then you have to think you only get 1 mark for your conclusion and whether it's right or wrong. So say they say, is this a reportable irregularity? You'll get your mark. Whether you say yes or no, you'll get your mark, your 1 mark, provided that you gave support for it. And the support is what the bulk of the marks is for. So it could be 7 marks, 1 mark for saying yes and 1 mark for saying no, either way, based on the other six marks would be for the process, building the answer. That's why I say give the answer, yes or no, versus building an answer. It's a process. And that is what the marks are for. So if you start thinking like this, then you start thinking, but they're going to look for my proof. That's why I say think like a lawyer. You're going to say yes, based on what? Based on the theory, all the principles in the Audit Profession Act on reportable irregularities. But you can't just say all the theory, this is the law, this is the rules. You have to say this specific case said this is what happened. So you have to build a case that supports your conclusion. And that is how you get marks for a question. Because I remember writing a whole bunch of stuff and then getting 1 or 2 marks for it. And I couldn't understand why. And it's because I didn't mention the theory, applied it, and then concluded based on that process. So remember, the process is what the marks are for. And I'll show you an example. Say, for instance, for the tax calculation, if they say calculate the taxable income for this individual or for this company, there's 1 mark for the answer, the taxable income, and you have to give the answer to get any marks. But the bulk of the marks will be for the process, for each line item that you said yes or no, it's included or it's not, and this is the calculations. So the process is what the marks are for. Look at the mark allocation. So if something is for, say it's a tax discussion question, there was some receipt and it's for 3 marks, then gross income definition might be enough. But if it's 20 marks, then you have to say more than just the gross income definition and applying it. Then you must look out for a specific situation. Maybe there's something that you first have to classify. This is a installment sale agreement versus a operating lease or whatever. So just look, if there's a lot of marks in the discussion question, ask yourself whether you first maybe have to classify the transaction or the agreement or whatever this thing is based on the theory and application, and then discuss the tax implications or discuss the VAT implications or discuss the recognition or measurement. So read very carefully what they want. And if it's for 5 marks or a few marks, then it's most likely a simple answer. But if it's for 20 marks, more than likely there's different components and you have to read carefully to see what that is. So if they say discuss the recognition criteria of this agreement. Agreement means it's very vague. So you first have to maybe classify the agreement as something, or maybe discuss whether this is qualifies as a contract before you do the revenue recognition. So just look at the market location. And then when you structure your answer, use headings. Don't just write. If you just start writing, so if your page is, if you write 2 pages without any headings, then it's going to be very difficult to mark. And it also proves, or it indicates that your thought process is not structured. So when you practice questions this week, make sure to use headings. And if there's something, try to break it up into look at the required to decide how to break it up into headings. So if they ask you 2 or 3 things, so say they said discuss the risks from a strategic and operational point of view. Remember, there was that and strategic and operational, and those are 2 very different things. Strategic are the long-term, bigger picture stuff, and operational is the day-to-day operations of the company. So if they said those 2 things, you need at least 2 headings, one for strategic issues and one for operational issues. You can't not have those headings. Otherwise, you might just write a whole bunch of stuff and only hit one of the 2. So make sure that you use headings when you structure your question. Same for measurement and recognition, all of that. Just write it down so to make sure that you address everything, like classify the transaction, initial recognition, then measurement, if that is what they asked. And then make sure that you answer the question. I'll show you an example just now. And then also, yeah, if there's missing information, usually there's no missing information, but sometimes it feels like something is missing. And you could sit there for 20 minutes trying to figure out where this missing piece of information is. And it's more likely than not that you just misread it. But if you really feel strongly that there's some missing information, don't leave the question out. Quickly make an assumption. Say, I assume the discount rate is 15%, and then use that for the rest of the calculation. You'll lose 1 or maybe 2 marks, but you'll get all the other marks because they'll mark with your mistake. If you leave out the rest of the question because you felt they didn't give you the discount rate and you can't do the NPV, now you lose all the marks for all the cash flows that you had to do for the capital budgeting question, just because you maybe missed the discount rate, or maybe it really wasn't there. But if you feel something is missing, make the assumption, lose the mark, but at least get all the other marks that follow on that piece of missing information. I'm going to quickly jump ahead just to show you an extreme example where someone got 0, where they should have at least gotten a few marks. So this person had to calculate the normal taxable income and provide reasons and substantiate in terms of the Income Tax Act where an amount is excluded from taxable income or not, subject to tax, or not allowable as a deduction. So it's quite a lot of commas here. So make sure that you read this 2 or 3 times to make sure what should be included and what should not. So they said, calculate normal tax payable. So not taxable income, normal tax payable. So there's the first thing. I said normal taxable income, and you could do that and then lose the marks for calculating the tax payable. And that's exactly what this person did. So I would stop there. Calculate normal tax payable. So now you know the answer should be normal tax payable after all your percentages has been applied, etc. And then after rebates, so after the rebates, which is usually given, so that's a free mark, and this person didn't do that. And tax credits, so that's another free mark because they give you the tax credits. You just have to know how many dependents were there for the medical aid contribution. So read this again. Calculate normal tax payable. So you need a tax payable after rebates and tax credits, which are 2 free marks. That's already 5% of this whole paper. This was a test for the year of assessment. So make sure you've got the date right. And then next, provide reasons and substantiate in terms of the income tax rate where an amount is excluded from taxable income. So you'll calculate the tax payable, but everything in the question should be addressed, whether it's taxable income or not, or subject to tax, or not allowable as a deduction. So let's look at this. So yes, there was the whole question. You'll see there's some question marks. So what I would do is I would start from the top. Salary and bonus. Put the line item there on the calculation, and then decide should the whole thing be included or not. Then bursary, there's a question mark. So then they give you the bursary, and now you have to discuss this. Some of it might not be, and this is where you get your marks. It's for the discussion of um, whether this should be included or not. Now, let me show you this person's question. So this is the answer. They started off well, salary and bonus, 1.4 million, that's fine. Then they said rental income, 72,000. So there's no reference to a working year. They did give a working 6,000 times 12. So let's go back and see what the rental income was. So rental of the flat, note 5. So we go to note 5, and you can see here all this information. Yes, there's the 6,000. So yes, times 12. Oh, they said for the year was 6,000. So they multiplied it by 12. So there's already just a misreading. They assumed it's per month. It's per year already. So there was a mistake. But then what about all the expenses that could be deducted? So this person lost so many easy marks by just missing the expenses. I want to jump in. The biggest mistake here, you'll see there's the next page. It's just calculations, and some of them were referenced here. So there's a note 3. I don't see a note 1. I don't see a note 2. So remember, if I'm an examiner, and this is why it's important to think like an examiner. I'm marked hundreds and thousands of exam papers. So what would I do? I know the question said calculate normal tax payable. That's the question. So I would look at this and say, where is the normal tax payable? I would go down to the bottom. I'll see there's nothing there. So you draw a line through this and you give 0. That's what should happen. Now, a lecturer might be lenient, and then they'll say, okay, let's see what they have and give some marks for the calculations. But technically, you don't have to. And SAICA also won't. If they don't see tax payable, they'll give you 0 because you didn't answer the question. Now, this is crucial to know. The next thing is, so what this person should have done is said, taxable income, 6 million. Just put a number there. Then applied the tax tables, which was given. Put the taxable income in there. You'll get your mark. Then say less primary rebate. Put it in there and you'll get your mark. Even if you put the wrong amount there, just put it there and you might get a mark for it. Then says less tax credits and put a number in there. Even if you don't have time to do the calculation, just put a number in there and deduct it and give your final answer. Because then you could get 2 or 3 free marks at the bottom, and the examiner will go up and see what did you do in the calculation. Because remember, this whole thing here is just a calculation to get to an answer. So don't leave out the final answer in any question. Another thing is they said reimbursable travel expenses, but then there's nothing next to it. There's no, this next thing is interest on the loan. So next to reimbursement travel expenses, there's nothing there. But on the next page, there is a calculation, reimbursement of travel expenses. So this working 2 will not get marked. You'll get 0 for this because it's not referenced in the answer. Remember, the answer was calculate tax payable, and then they'll work back and say, where is reimbursement travel expenses? I'll see you didn't do it, and you'll get 0. They won't now say, maybe there's a calculation somewhere later on in one of the pages and go look for it. If there was a reference here to note 2, yes, then they'll go to note 2 and say, there's something else we can mark, and they'll give you some marks for it. So this is super, super important, and these are the things that make students fail very badly is because of poor exam techniques. So this is the stuff that you need to practice this week. So for discussion questions, it's more than likely that a big portion of all the papers will be discussion questions. So for IFRS and tax, use that theory, application, conclusion. So should be, is in the case study. So match the two for everything that you write. You don't have to first mention all the theory and then apply all the theory. When you put a piece of theory down, immediately say why you use it. So what piece of information in the case study are you applying to that theory? And then at the end, you can conclude based on it. For management accounting, it's more tricky because there's not always theory. So for instance, in a risk discussion questions, if you discuss business risks, yes, there's some theory like PESTEL and SWOT analysis and Porter's five forces, but those things are not, you won't get marks for mentioning those. Those are just to help you generate marks. So if you have to discuss the risks in a specific industry, use PESTEL and think, are there any political stuff? If there's not, leave it out. You don't have to say political, oh, there's none. Environmental, there's none. Social, yes, it's a social issue. Just use it to find stuff to say, to generate ideas. But the most important thing is the information in the case study. The person who thought up or dreamt up the case study put every single word in there or every line in there for a reason. They want to test whether you can extract the information. So in a management accounting discussion question, be specific to the case. First, try to use the information in the paragraphs that was given. Don't ignore anything. If you don't find anything else to say for marks, then think of the industry in more generally. So if it's like a media type industry, it's a classic example, it's old now, but in the media industry, you might say uh, one of the risks is like paper-based magazines and newspapers are being phased out. So it's or content creators just they can make their own news channels. So it's going to be you're going to struggle to get advertising revenue. But this is something that might not have been mentioned in the case study, but because they mentioned the industry, it's very relevant to this specific thing. So first thing, priority info from the case study, the specific company, mention the name. Next, industry specific. So in this industry, what are the things that could go wrong? And then only then you'll mention generic stuff like foreign exchange or whatever. If they don't import or export, don't mention it. But generic stuff generally don't earn you any marks. So leave that. If you start mentioning generic stuff, you know you're waffling, and you only do that if you have extra time left. But if you're running out of time, leave out the generic stuff and focus on the specific stuff in the case study. For auditing, read very carefully. Make sure that you answer the question. That was another example that I had here. So here they said, describe additional internal controls that should be in place. So the verb here is describe. What should they describe? Additional. So not the ones that's currently there, additional internal controls that should be in place. And what did this person do? They wrote the tests of control, attempt to access the system, attempt to access the master file, attempt to enter invalid ID numbers. So those are not additional internal controls that should be in place. So it's close. They did the actual, what tests of control should they do? But they didn't answer the question, so that's a 0. So make sure that you read the question very, very carefully. Another thing for auditing, don't jump to conclusions. For instance, oh, yeah, Bruce, no worries. If you have to leave, don't worry. I'm going to record this, so don't worry. But thanks for mentioning that. um, so I'm just going to continue here. So where was I? So for auditing, this is one area where I often wrote 2 or 3 pages and I got half a mark or 1.5 marks out of 30. And I couldn't understand why. So read the question again and make sure that you answer what they are asking. For instance, if they ask you for ethical considerations, don't immediately jump into the CPC, the Code of Professional Conduct. If it's a chartered accountant, then the CPC applies, and then you can discuss the CPC in the specific formats that Yvonne explained very well in our auditing classrooms. But if it's not a chartered accountant, the CPC doesn't apply, and then you can't use that. So then it's more general ethical concerns. Maybe the Companies Act if it's a director. Audit procedures. This is a one that I lost a lot of marks. And when I looked at the solution, I'm like, but I mentioned almost all of this. Why didn't I get marks? So for audit procedures, you have to write it in a specific way. You have to write it as an instruction. So pretend that you are an audit senior and you are writing the procedure to a first-year audit clerk that is going out on an audit. They're going to sit with your instructions, your audit procedures, and they have to perform this without being able to phone you. You are going to be in other meetings at other clients. So you have to write this procedure detailed enough so that the person reading it knows exactly what to do. You can't say, uh, observe the records for duplicate employees. How do you do that? You have to say, exactly what to do, or look for fictitious employees in the payroll. You have to. How do you look for that? You have to uh, trace, or you have to confirm for a selection of ID numbers that the employee exists, or that you must inspect the ID document of a selection of ID numbers to check for the accuracy or validity of it. So it has to be specific enough that the person reading it knows exactly what to physically go and do. If you just say check for duplicate employees, they're going to say, but how do I do that? How do I look for those? So you have to be very specific. And then the next thing that you have to mention is why. So either the assertion, like validity or completeness or whatever, or accuracy or completeness, or you have to just say why. So that is super important. Okay, this we've gone through. Okay, I'm actually close to the end now. So if you're watching this, it's most of you are going to watch the recording. That you've only got a few days left. Focus on your exam technique, scoring marks, reading carefully, planning your answers, structuring your answers. Don't spend too much time on new theory now. If you go through theory, make sure it's the fundamentals, the basics. If you can't do the basics of weighted average cost of capital, don't spend time on the Armada formula or levering, unlevering betas and weird stuff. Focus on the basics first. If you don't know the basics and you don't know what to do, then yes, do the tricky stuff, but rather focus on questions and focusing on your strategy in a test to make sure that you know what you'll do if you hit the blank and you don't know where to start. And that generally comes with practicing without the solution. Because if you practice with the solution, you train your brain that there's some backup plan, and in the test, you get caught out. So just do a question or two and experience the anxiety, experience the stress of not being able to start, not knowing where to start, and see what your brain comes up with. If your brain just freaks out, then you know there's something that you need to work on. And then just think to yourself, how do I get something on paper? Is there maybe 2 or 3 headings I can write down based on the required or based on the information in the case study? Maybe there's a few transactions that I need to include. So each one of the transactions, or maybe there's stuff that they suggested. Some managers suggested changes to the company. Maybe those are the headings. But just think, what can I put down so I can just start the question? Don't look at the solution to get started, because that's not an option in the exam. So you have to practice these types of skills this week so that you have something more than what you currently have. More knowledge is probably not the answer, because you've had a whole year to work on knowledge, and cramming enough knowledge in without being able to use it to score marks this week is probably impossible. So when you do questions, focus on those skills that I've mentioned in this session, and don't overthink it. So if you get stuck on something, don't overthink it. Ask yourself, how much would this likely be worth in a test? If it's very little, just ignore it and move on. And then remember, during the exams, you won't be able to ask me questions. We can't answer questions during exam days, because there's a risk of it being seen as cheating. So that's the one thing. Also, I will be away next week out of the country. I have a backup internet. If it fails, worst case, it fails miserably and I can't log in, I'm sure it will be fine. But if in a case like that, just remember what I've said in this session. The theory, that one thing that you couldn't figure out in a question, that's not going to be the reason why you fail. So just move on. Remind yourself that you've done a lot of questions, you've worked throughout the year. So that one thing that you get stuck on that you want to ask is not going to be the reason you fail. But hopefully you won't have any big issues, and I'll be thinking of you. Good luck with the exams, and remember, slow down, take it easy, take a breath, read very carefully, answer all the questions, um, and smash it out of the park.